I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Okay, we have a medium-length agenda with a lot of hopefully illuminating facts and experts and back and forth questions and answer sessions. So we'll start with Dr. Tuttle for a quick overview of the purpose of it.
Are any public comments first?
Oh, I apologize. Yes. Are there any public comments from those in attendance? Yes, Mr. Nugent.
Hi, Kevin Nugent, Pointers for Academic Excellence. I don't have a formal statement today. I wanted to speak to a few things that have been concerning to us and to members of the community, and I want to address those. Number one, I want to thank Trustee Cotton for taking on the leadership of having this meeting. The implementation and financing of the bond are critical questions that need to be answered. We're only a month out, and this is kind of the first go-around at this, and I think with all of the concerns regarding the implementation, the projects that are going to happen, when they're going to happen, and how they're going to meet the community's needs are important and need to be out in the public. I also want to address the letter that we wrote to the board on September 17th regarding concerns regarding over Trombley and the Parcells pool space. Only one board member replied to our comment, and that board member said thank you for your support, which we believe is very dismissive. If you're addressing concerns from the community in the same fashion, I would caution you on taking that approach, because it feels like you're not listening to concerns when you reply in that manner. Trustee Derringer was the only one to reply to that email. The only communication we received from any board members on that was Trustee Worden, who admonished us online and made misstatements about her role as a trustee or a board member and not being able to advocate for the bond. I found those comments discouraging, given the amount of support and events that we've done to support families and community members, to just be dismissed as a super PAC and say we won the election and the community has spoken just seems to be childish in a way, and not conducive to moving forward together. Now, we've been very vocal about supporting the bond, and we've been very vocal about supporting people that have had concerns about the bond, and to not have those concerns addressed and have them lingering online for the community to still discuss are very concerning. And it just demonstrates that there's not a complete understanding of what it is that you're doing with this bond. You're essentially opening a building and closing a space in another. And those events have lasting impacts on the community and impact numerous people. And so you're not closing a space, you're closing a pool. You're closing a pool when other pools are open. You're making decisions that exclude, don't include, and those questions are just that people have around that. And I think there's really good answers for those questions, but they're not being provided. I think the bond overall speaks to all of the needs and concerns that this community has to address 95%. But if you have 5% out there that people are critical of, those things need to be addressed and can be addressed. I think hopefully there's some really exciting things that are going to happen in the strategic plan that will address those concerns. And people look forward to hearing them. But when absentee ballots have already gone out and people are making decisions on this, I think we've moved the cart too late for some voters. And that is disappointing, but I hope that these conversations are fruitful in the next few weeks and that you guys can address those concerns adequately for the members of the community that are voting on the bond, and we can get this bond passed. Thank you.
Okay, is there anybody else that has a public comment? Okay, now we'll move into item 3, information and discussion. 3.1, welcome overview and objectives. Now I will turn it over to Dr. Tuttle for a brief overview.
Thank you, Trustee Derringer. So our objective of this evening is really to hear from the experts. And Sean Wahl is on his way, so we will probably move 3.1 bullet point 2 to another time when he's available. But I want to introduce our experts today. If you don't know, Tom Colis is our bond counsel from Miller Canfield. Paul Theriault is obviously from Plant Moran. I know Gary Kent is on his way, but
Here
he's
any
stuck in
moment.
any moment, but he's stuck in traffic as well. So the goal for tonight is to hear from the experts so that the trustees who are at the table can ask any questions that they have. And I think the two action items that need to be discussed particularly, and there can be more for potential recommendation to the full board, would be when the bonds will be sold and for what amount in that first series. So those are the two. Hey, Sean. Now you made it. Take a breath. You want to sit right here is great. This is Sean Wahl from PFM. And so those are the two things that I hope that you can come to some kind of decision on. Sorry about that. Tonight, and then anything else that you think is prudent to talk. And I would encourage you, ask all the questions of the experts, because I don't claim to be an expert in any one of their fields. So we have them here, and this is the time to ask the questions. So that's what I see as the objective this evening. And now that Sean's here, do you want to go, Sean, or you want a breath? Take a breath, because
No, sorry. I thought I could make it from Ann Arbor, but it just was like 2 accidents on 94. But I'm all good. Thank you for having us. Sorry. Thanks for your patience. Yeah, I don't know, Tom, do you want to start?
Yeah, I mean, actually, since we'll talk about development bond,
Yeah.
it says PFM, but we'll kind of work in connection with
Go
that.
for it. The floor is yours.
Since that actually, we just kind of give you kind of the history of like, this actually takes a couple of years to kind of think through. So I know that both PFM and Plant Moran Realpoint have been working with the district, for the last few years, thinking about, bringing another bond issue to the public. And when you do that, you think about, how does this layer in with the existing debt that the district has? So the district has recently, we had some 2017 refunding bonds that made their last payment. There's also the previous bond issue, the 2019 bonds and the 2021 bonds that are currently outstanding. So obviously, the issues of the district are voted, which means that the voters authorize an amount of bonds to be issued to finance improvements to the various facilities of the school district. With that comes the ability to levy a separate tax just to cover debt service on those bonds. So when you think through, when you talk through timing of when do you issue bonds, when do you go to the voters, how does that layer into the existing debt portfolio of the district? That's when that timing actually starts, years in advance, prior to certain people at the administration being here. So those discussions have been taking place for a number of years. When it actually comes time to, consider, well, when are we actually going to go to the voters? That's when typically we get involved as your bond counsel, because we're the ones that are really assisting in drafting the ballot proposal and kind of, figuring out, well, what dates are we going to target and how does that language then play out for authorization? So again, that started sometime back in 2024, maybe even earlier with respect to the financial part of it and determining what's gonna, like timing and things like that, impact on millage rates looking forward. So again, we started looking back at 2024 as to, okay, what are the possible election dates for 2025? And considering, of course, that the district just successfully approved renewals to operating millages and sinking funds in 2024. So the focus was shifted immediately then to authorization for an additional authorization to issue bonds. So again, looking at those various dates, obviously there's different considerations for different elections. Certainly timing as to and costs of the election were considered. And it was determined by the board to pursue the November election. So as you remember, obviously, that from that determination all the way up until when the proposal was approved by the board to go on the November ballot, lots of discussions with respect to, well, what types of projects, what types of improvements are we looking to undertake with this bond issue? Because from that kind of list, that wish list, we then developed the actual bond proposal. And you remember at board meetings, a couple of different thoughts as to what the language should look like. Should we be a little bit more all-encompassing, where we're talking about improvements to all buildings, equipment, furnishing, technology for infrastructure, acquiring technology and infrastructure technology, Or do we want to be specific to certain types of buildings and highlight certain things? Ultimately, the board decided back at its meeting in June to put the proposal out that's in front of there now. So obviously that assumes, that authorizes, if approved, the issuance of bonds in one or more series up to $120 million. Now again, with that comes the ability to issue bonds in multiple series. The number of series is really up to the board to determine. At the original thought process, it was potentially 3 series, one in 2025, one in 2027, and one in 2030. And we'll get through some of the why you talk about issuing bonds in series as opposed to doing it all at once. Number of different considerations for that I'll talk about with respect to key deadlines and compliance requirements.
Sorry, Tom, the other thing just to layer on that is, when we talk about election time, we also talk about levy time. And in a lot of school districts, levy on July only or a split levy. This district levies in December only, right? So that is another kind of key piece of the puzzle. Oftentimes school districts with a July levy will go in May, and then they try to really speed it up and get it on the July levy. And so it's a similar situation here with the December levy.
So yeah, timing becomes critical depending upon when you're voting and when you're levying your tax to support that. So again, the ballot proposal provides for, in essence, the question itself is, shall the school district be authorized to issue bonds in an amount not to exceed $120 million for the purposes described in the ballot proposal? Then there's some informational material that's part of the ballot that's included about the annual debt millage required. And what we say in the ballot proposal is to retire all bonds of the district. So you want to give the voter an idea as to how this impacts the existing millage rate, whether the district intends to go above that or stay below that. And obviously the statement here and the expectation would be that not only the debt service on this bond issue, but the existing bond issues would not exceed the 3.14 mils, which is the 2024 millage rate that was levied to support the debt service on the bonds. And then we provide kind of what the estimate is for the first millage and then the average annual millage. Again, those are estimates based on what we think the bonds will sell at, when they're sold, and what the taxable value of the district is at the time, right? Because all those factors go into how much you're actually levying each year to cover debt service. We'll get into briefly in a few minutes some of the specifics of state law as to what the district's allowed to levy and those types of things. But that's the language that's kind of laid out in the proposal. And we also say that the maximum duration of each series will be not more than 20 years. So again, that doesn't mean that in totality all the bonds will be paid in 20 years, but from the issuance of each series. So that's really the substance of the bond proposal. And again, all the information that's provided kind of comes off of that. So happy to answer any questions on just that part of it right there.
Just a couple.
Yeah.
In that the multi-factors that are coming into play, like what is our current millage rate, what is the taxable home value, what's the timing if we add on more debt now? Like how do you, I guess I'm just not clear how we home in on exactly what the millage rate is going to be or how we make that estimate, because we're 3.14 is what we're trying to target, right? We're trying to not go above 3.14. So that does not allow us to do more than, 45 million was the proposed first series. Is that like the maximum that we could issue and stay at that and be able to service it with 3.14? Was there a range, like you could issue between 5 million and 45 and stay within the 3.14?
So keep in mind, the 3.14 is a maximum amount, right? So that's, but that doesn't mean that you couldn't levy a millage that's less than that 3.14, right? So the 3.14, the idea was we wouldn't issue, the expectation is we wouldn't exceed that 3.14 based upon the structure that was developed as part of the bond proposal. That doesn't mean you have to actually levy 3.14, right? So you levy what you need to pay debt service in the following year. So, which is one of the requirements is, okay, what debt service do we have coming due? So we have a December 1 tax levy. What debt service is due in 2026? And from the existing debt and any new debt that we're issuing. And then keep in mind then, how much then principal and interest payments are due in 2026. that'll produce a number, X amount of dollars that needs to be paid to bondholders. And then when you factor in what the taxable value is, you can determine a millage rate. Now, that would be if everything's collected in a perfect time. So a lot of times, and state law allows you to do is, you want to estimate what your collections are going to be based on the millage that you levy. So you take into account certain factors like delinquencies and tax appeals and things like that when you're determining your millage rate for any particular year, not just this year, but any year going forward. It really starts from, what do I owe to the bondholders in that next calendar year?
Right.
And then what's my taxable value and what do I need to levy to generate that dollar amount? Because we voted a bond proposal, from a state law perspective, the district is allowed to levy whatever tax is necessary to pay debt service on the bonds, regardless of the 3.14 that we think we are not going to exceed. You're authorized to levy whatever's necessary. So, for example, if taxable
So
values
the tax
somehow
values
decrease, go back to
2010.
right to those levels where we have this great recession and taxable value plummeted, the district's authorized to levy in addition above whatever tax is necessary to support that debt service.
Okay.
Now, in most circumstances, typically, you're not going to need to exceed that if taxable value increases on a normal level. Again, when you structure these bond issues, so when PFM looks at how are we going to lay out principal each year for considering what's already due on the existing bonds, principal's due annually, interest semi-annually, then you layer on each series of bonds to try to level out, or at least have a good determination as to what the impact is from a millage going forward on an annual basis.
So is it fair to say that the 45 million that was the first series sold in December, that is the estimate of is it essentially the maximum amount that could be issued and still stay within an estimated 3.14 cap?
Yeah, I think based upon how that structure, how the principal would be paid based on that 45 million and the estimated taxable value.
Right, yeah.
And rate, I think that was kind of the projections, right, Sean?
Yeah, no, and there is, because of the fact that there's two parts of the equation. There's the principal and the interest, right? So you can kind of, you can structure more principal to keep that millage high and then be able to fold in the additional series, right? So if you were doing this in one series, 120 would be probably not doable because you couldn't fit all that in, right? But if you phase in 45 and then, 45 and 30 or something like that, it allows you to kind of take it in digestible chunks.
Yeah, and that's why, we have the existing debt that we're working down, we're layering in this new debt, that was, essentially, per the estimates, that's about the max that we could do this year and maintain, and then we'd have to pick up new series later down the road.
Yeah, it also ties back to what's a reasonable design and construction schedule,
Right.
right? Because we don't
Right.
need all 120 million day
Exactly.
one. We're going to design projects for 9 months or a year as we start to bid things out, got to order our equipment and things like that, and then you're going to start one project while you're designing the next project, so it kind of, again, you want to try to keep things consistent for the taxpayer, and you want to keep that consistent tax flow or dollar flow from the bond sale so that we can keep the architects paid, the engineers paid, the construction people paid.
All right, one more, and then I'll yield the floor. One more. What are the consequences of being, more, just doing more series? Instead of doing 3, we'll do it in 6 or 8 or something. What are the consequences to the underwriters, or are there any of expanding beyond what we have?
Yeah.
What we're anticipating now?
There's kind of two sides to that. You're going to pay issuance costs, right? The costs associated with issuing the bonds, are generally done, on a by-series basis. So if you're doing it each series, it's not going to move the needle a ton, but there is going to be more costs associated with it. Then you also take interest rate risk, right? So if you wait to hold off to issue bonds and rates go up, you might not be able to afford as much because all of a sudden the market's moved away from you. And what would have cost you 4% last year now is 5%, right?
Yeah.
So those are kind of the two main things.
The costs are the cost proportional to the value of the series, or are they more fixed?
Well, that's a good question. They're both, right? So some costs are fixed on a dollar per bond basis, right? So if it's 45 million, you divide that by 1,000 and you multiply it out. And then there's other costs that are fixed fee just based on coming to the market and doing the deal, right? And so some of that is ebb and flow, and there's a breakdown, between our fees, between underwriter fees, between official statement fees, between all that. And so they kind of vary, but the fixed costs kind of carry from series to series, and that's kind of where you see that carryover of higher issuance.
Just to give you an example of like, when you think about cost of issuance, I mean, you have underwriter's discount, right? So a fee that the underwriter is going to charge to buy the bonds. Because at the end of the day, right, they have to sell bonds to their customers. They're not holding them for their own account. So there's a discount that's built into every issue for that cost. 2 series, 3 series, 6 series, you're going to have that same cost for every single one. There's bond counsel's cost, there's financial advisor's cost that you're going to have every series, but they're going to be based upon typically the size of the series, and they're not always going to be doubled every single time, right? So because there's familiarity with the series, with the issue, you will have those costs on every particular issue, but it'll really depend upon typically the size of each series of bonds. You're going to have rating agency fees. So each time you go out for a rating, each bond's going to be rated by independent rating agencies, Moody's or Standard & Poor's, and they're going to charge a cost based on the size of the issue each time. There's some nominal costs, like there's a paying agent where instead of the district making the payment to bondholders directly, there's a corporate trust department, whether it be UMB Bank or US Bank Trust, that they send invoices, the semi-annual invoices that say, okay, here's what's due on this series of bonds on May 1 or November 1, remit payment by this date. So that's a nominal cost. The Department of Treasury, Michigan Department of Treasury has a fee that we issue with every single issue of bonds. Again, that's a nominal fee.
In general, are the costs netted from the proceeds? So we do a $45 million series, and Andrea, you now have $44,500,000 to spend.
Yes.
Another good question.
Yeah, so what ends up happening is, so each series, when you're developing how much you want to issue for each series, the two really points, and Sean, correct me if I'm wrong, the first part is what do you want going into the construction fund? And then we build on top of that your issuance costs based upon that, right? So there's the, what do I need for projects? And then what's the incremental cost above that? If I'm going to finance those costs, which you're going to typically, that you're going to cover those costs of issuance. So you'll see in any particular numbers run, kind of the sources and uses of funds, where the sources are the bond dollars and the uses are construction fund deposit, and then cost of issuance, including underwriter's discount.
Sean, do you have the actual numbers of the pro forma projection of what? It's usually like maybe $1 million or $1.5 million would be the closing costs.
For
$120 million.
Yeah. So in just excluding underwriter's discount, and I've got to go through this, but for the whole program, probably anywhere from $500,000 to $525,000 over 3 series.
I was thinking with the discount, but you're right.
Right.
If we get a premium, then we can offset the discount with the premium.
So subject to approval, right? If you do get premium, you should be able to pay for that. So just in terms of what comes to the district after you sell the bonds and close, anywhere from probably about $500,000 to $525,000 over 3 series for the bonds.
Could you explain that about the premium? I mean, my understanding, if the interest rate changes, you could actually possibly get more or less from the sale.
I can, but Sean can do it better.
And Tom can too. We used a 120 as like a bottom line, right? And then if you get original issue premium, that counts against that 120. So say you issue them at a premium, 20 million, you get $5 million in premium. That counts as if it's 25 million. And a lot of that comes from tax code, right? But of that, you can net out underwriter's discount. So say, it's 20 million plus 5 million in, 5,100,000 in premium, and the underwriter's discount is $100,000. You net the 25 million, the 25 million, and that's all that counts, right? So
could you break it down on one? So let's say we go for 5%, and the market's, they're selling great, and the par value's up. I mean, that's what we're talking about, right? That the market says, no, we're gonna
They're
pay you
more.
more,
Yeah, they're
$101
paying more.
bucks.
Right, so
Yeah.
premium
Yeah.
in general is, more than the face value of the actual dollar amount. So each maturity is gonna have a par amount. So let's just say 2027 is a 5% and the maturity is $200,000.
Yep.
They're gonna pay you more than that 5%, right? So that's gonna generate a premium. Well, that, for tax purposes, that's actually bond proceeds. So it's treated as bond proceeds. And the point is, while you can get that in any particular series, that still counts towards the overall authorization, right? So
So
we're
in other
gonna,
words, you couldn't sell them at a 10% interest rate and generate $500 million in revenue. The tax code wouldn't let you do that.
right, and your authorization, again, premium counts towards your voter authorization, netting out underwriter's discount. So yes, in today's market, and Sean, I think you can say that it's a premium market, so a lot of the bond issues are generating premium. So for the first or second series, if you need those proceeds, and that's always a question, right? Can you spend those proceeds, that premium, within the time periods allowed, and we'll get to that very shortly here. And if you do, then you can use those monies and it goes into your construction fund, just like if it was a regular, par amount or the principal amount, par amount of the bonds.
And you'd have to take a discount on the third series.
Correct. So what you do is we keep a rolling, and every time that we authorize the next series, we'll indicate how much was issued in the prior series, how much premium was generated, and how much authorization is left. So we'll keep a rolling tally of, and PFM puts together a schedule that shows you after each series how much amount of authorization is left from the ballot proposal. So let's go back to multiple series and some of the requirements for each series. So when you issue a series of bonds, and regardless of whether it's 1 or 2 or 6, every time you go to issue a series of bonds, that particular series has to meet the tax code requirements. And there's 2 primary ones. One relates to timing of when you issue your bonds based upon when you're going to start construction. And 2 relates to how long you can have those proceeds invested in an unrestricted yield. So we call it the 5% rule and the 85% rule. So every time the district issues a bond issue that's tax exempt, you have to have a reasonable expectation to enter into a binding contract within 6 months of the issuance date to spend at least 5% of the proceeds of the bonds. Now, it doesn't mean you actually spend 5% within 6 months, but you have to enter into a binding contract. And you would say, well, why would the IRS have that rule? What they don't want is issuers getting into the market and thinking that, hey, I can get in early and I can just earn and arbitrage these dollars without actually having projects lined up ready to go, or the expectation to start spending some money, or into contracts to spend at least 5%. So one of the requirements for every single tax exempt bond issue is you have to have an expectation to at least have that contract entered into where you're going to spend at least 5% of the proceeds of the bonds. So that's the 5% rule.
Don't sell the bonds until you're ready to get going.
Yeah, so it's issued them, right. And the second one is you basically have 3 years to spend your proceeds for every series of bonds that you do. That's why when large authorizations like this, where you have multiple projects taking place at various facilities, you're going to sequence them in series because it would be almost impossible to manage doing every single building at once and doing one single series where you have to accomplish everything in a 3-year period.
Ben would kill us, for sure.
So most of the school districts that we authorize are multiple series, 2, 3, 4, 5. I mean, Ann Arbor voted.
Pretty typical for
3 is pretty typical, yeah. For this series, that's for this size issue, again, you're sequencing, various improvements to buildings and how much can you spend and, which buildings are you doing, and all that timing takes place. So the idea is you have to have that reasonable expectation to spend at least 85% of the proceeds within 3 years and 100% within 4 years.
And that's something that, Ben, that you've weighed with all of the, sinking funds coming in now and the projects that enables, that if we did, because the 45 million for this first series sounds like it's largely a mathematical exercise of what would be the maximum that we could issue. And I know that we have all the projects that were, defined both from the administration and from the bond committee. But is that something that you, like, do you have that mapped out of, yeah, we could get to spending this first tranche in the next 3 years?
Sure. We've got potential projects mapped out for if the bond passes that we would tackle, and I feel that's a fair number.
It's kind of a complicated question too, because there's a lot of competing interests, right? Like,
Sure.
somebody wants the tennis courts first, somebody wants parcels first, somebody wants farms first, whatever. We try to make it efficient too, right? We actually had a meeting back in July to talk about, in July, do we want to go start hiring architects and hiring construction managers and start drawing before the bond passes, or do we want to wait until it passes? There's some risk there, right? You could maybe get jump started early, but there's a big expenditure of dollars that somehow we have to pay for, and if the bond were to not pass, then what do you do? Most districts wait until the bond passes. They really want to focus on the informational campaign, making sure the public knows what we're going to do, why we're going to do it, make sure everybody gets out to vote, we pass the bond, and then start hiring professional service firms. So as far as the 45 million, we can spend the money as fast as you guys have it. It is really comes down to the disruption to school, to teachers. To
Well, yeah, I
students.
mean, the observation is, from my perspective, has simply been like even with something like the windows at Trombley,
Mhm.
it's this cycle of, okay,
There
we're going
is.
to do these bids, and
Yeah.
whereas people in the community may have felt like, okay, in fact, people did say, let's get Trombley reopened for elementary school by fall of 2025, you know, like, boy, when you actually think about what the actual cycle is to do construction and do the bids, it's much longer time period, and that's
Yeah.
why I guess it just.
Yeah, for construction, really, let's say we start in January, let's say we get everybody, or at least the architect and the CM hired in November and December, we get them ready to go on January 1st. It's gonna take about 9 months to probably design the first batch of big construction projects. Then we have to bid everything out and get everything ordered, and then you really start the next spring. That's for like a normal, renovate a building or build a big addition or something like that. But some smaller projects you can do faster, like parking lots or roofs or playgrounds or technology equipment or furniture, things like that you can move faster on. So I don't think we'd have any major renovation projects probably until spring of '27, but you'd probably have a lot of other expenditures between now and then on smaller things, things that you can move quicker on, if that makes sense.
Wait, one more.
But you're right, there's a cycle to it for
This
sure.
is absolute like layman type question. So
Mhm.
like, if you just man on the street type question, like
Yeah.
why would I sell if on that timing? Okay, so we'll hire a CM in January. If the bond passes, we'll get somebody in January, and we'll spend 9 months defining out what the projects are going to be. Like, why would I take on $45 million in debt? At the end of the year, I'm paying for that all year long while people are just doing blueprints. Why don't we
Good
just-
question. There's a few different reasons which Sean will want to pop in on.
Yeah, no, and we've got some options here that we'll kind of talk through the benefits and considerations. We each, you're right, though. Once you start borrowing the money, you got to start paying interest on it.
Yeah.
But you're also, in today's interest rate environment, you're earning some money on your
Right,
project
right.
fund as well.
Right.
And so some of that offsets in some of these scenarios that we'll go through, kind of talk about, weighing each side of that equation, so.
Yeah, it's a little bit of, it's not gambling, but it is to a degree, right? If you sell them in this market, you know what you're gonna get. If you wait a year, it could go up, it could go down. Having the money in hand and being able to know that you can pay for the next batch of projects.
Yeah.
And then you're earning interest on it, and then when we bring, let's say, in the fall of '26, we bring $15 million worth of projects to the board to approve. Typically, we don't wanna bring more than we have cash to pay for, because we don't know for certain that we can sell the next series when we think we can. And so there's definitely a lot of things that go into it, a lot of considerations. It's a great question of whether it should be 45, should it be 30, should it be something different. It's a spot on question, but there's a lot of different angles that go into it or different perspectives.
So I have 2 questions. One is specific to our program, and the other is more general. And all ties in right at this moment. That's why I kept getting like jerky. Get right past the moment where it makes sense. The first is specific to our program. Did we use all of those inputs in that kind of formulaic calculation to determine 120 million for the whole program, or 45 million on the first series, or some combination of both? Like, we keep talking about 45 like it was calculated, but I think the 120 was calculated and then 45 came after, correct?
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that was it, right? We started with the 120 as kind of the top end number.
Right.
And then, how do we break this down? What's digestible? What can you do in projects? What can you issue at what times? And I think that was the genesis of the 40.
And 45 happens to
keep
be
that millage
approximately a
rate.
third of
Right.
120.
To keep that millage rate at the same number for taxpayers. You don't want to drop it and then put it higher, and then, to Tom's point earlier, if taxable values did something weird, and all of a sudden everybody's millage rate goes up after we just told them it's a no millage, or zero millage rate increase, sorry, I'll use the right terms, zero millage rate increase bond, and then you raise it, all of a sudden everybody's in the community is upset. So really, you want to try to keep that millage rate flat.
Right, so I just wanted to be clear that the algorithm didn't spit out 45, the algorithm spit out 120. 45 came after that number, right? So
That has more to do with how the debt and the
Yeah.
principal.
Yeah, how you sequence it out
Right.
and what impact that has on your millage rates.
Right, so that
Going
principle,
forward.
that principle rolls into my next question. So can you tell us what are the inputs that determine the premium that you guys were talking about? Is it interest rate related, or is it just market forces, or is it both?
It's both, right? So, predominantly right now, interest rates are, higher than they've probably been in the last 10 years. And investors want some interest rate protection, and so they prefer 5% coupons because, let's say in Tom's example, in 2027, the going market rate is 3%. So you would issue a 5% coupon and they would pay you more, a premium for that 5% coupon because it's worth more to them, right? So they pay you more than 100% for that. And so a lot of that is market driven. Now, if we were talking in 2020, 2021, in an ultra lower interest rate environment, we were seeing bond issues. I think maybe even your 2021 issue was issued at 3% coupons, right? But at the time, rates were low and it made a lot of sense because you can lock in a really low cost of capital. So a lot of it's market driven. But the other thing on the 5% coupons is it provides you downstream flexibility to refinance and call those in later, right? So most capital programs don't really look beyond 10 years, and sometimes they do, but municipal bonds are issued with a 10-year par call. So in 10 years, with a 5% coupon, you have a really good likelihood of being able to refinance that and either give taxpayers a break or build in some new capacity for some additional projects at a no mill increase. And there's a lot of kind of, sequencing that goes into that. But like you said, the market factors do play a big role.
The other point to that too, we said earlier, we can spend the money as fast as you guys can get it. The other factor we always take into account is that construction prices are going up, right? They've probably leveled out a little bit, but they're still going up 3 to 4 to 5% a year. So what I can buy in 26 versus what I'm going to be able to buy in 2030 is drastically different. So typically, the faster we can get the money, the more work we can do in year 1 and year 2 and year 3, the more money the district saves. In fact, on the last bond series, we moved so fast that we actually got a lot of projects out before COVID, before prices went up 50%. What we renovated south for was a fraction of what we had to renovate north for later, just because prices went up so high. So the faster we can move, usually you can avoid that future cost escalation too.
So I just want to check this kind of oversimplified understanding that if interest rate fluctuation up or down, if interest rates are up, it would help us on that initial investment and helping on the premium, and it would hurt us on what we owe the investors. Is there some kind of wash there, or?
Yeah, I mean, that's it, right? You'd be earning more on what's in the bank,
Right.
but it's going to cost more to borrow. So it's kind of a give and take. And it depends too, it gets more nuanced on where on the curve interest rates are higher, right? So recently it's been an inverted curve where the short, 3 to even 5 years has been higher than the long end, right? And so that's kind of shifted a little bit now. And so some of that, plays into the economics of it too.
Yeah, that was it for me at this moment.
I just had a question on the rating. The rating that the rating agency will bring is based on our neighborhoods, right? It's based on our cities or municipalities who are on the hook for paying this back. Is that correct? It's not on the school system. We're not rating the school system. Correct.
We have talked till we're blue in the face with rating agencies on this type of credit, right? Because this, as Tom said, is an unlimited tax. It's a dedicated debt levy that's not limited as to rate or amount on your taxable value, right? So to us, that is about as secure as you get, right? Every year, you're just going to set it and forget, you're going to get what you want. The Moody's and S&P still tie it back to the school district's general fund and finances to a certain degree. They feel that, should everything blow up and go crazy, the district would still be on the hook for this. So while they do give a lot of credit to the tax base, it still does, a lot of it does come back to the general fund operations, enrollment, things like that. So that's a pretty big part of the equation for the credit rating.
When you guys price out the mills and this formula to what you backed in the 120 million into, you probably took into account that a lot of the home values of our neighborhoods and said that they generally go up. Is that right?
Yeah, no, and I don't have it with me, but the taxable value history is something we look at. I think we're pretty modest on future taxable value growth. I think, we're assuming 3% next year, 2.5% for the next 4 years, and then 2% thereafter. So, but, there's
Whereas
also.
it's been a lot higher than that in
Yeah,
reality.
yeah, and I sure brought it with me, but it certainly has been a lot higher. And the fact is, investors, and there is like a name premium, right? When Ann Arbor Schools comes to the market, everybody wants it. When Grosse Pointe Schools comes out, you've got some alumni, people know who Grosse Pointe is, right? And so you do get some benefit in the market when people see Grosse Pointe Schools.
And you see a lot of it in Michigan because it's tax-free at the state level for residents in Michigan.
Yeah, and that kind of is some of the dynamic too, and some of the benefit of a negotiated sale is that, when you work with an underwriter, they do a really good job of being able to make sure it's available locally for folks, right? So, your individual brokers could participate and buy school bonds. Whereas if it was a competitive sale, they could probably, reach out to a broker and put it in order for a syndicate. But, an added benefit of a negotiated sale is that there should be some retail options for folks in the community to support the bond initiative.
The 5-year average taxable value change is 5.07%.
Yep.
Is the 5-year floating average.
I wanted to get back to a point that I think we've made a couple of times here about millage rate, right? Again, we talk about 3.14, 3.14, but you should be looking every year to determine what do I need, right? What do I need for that next year with a reasonable amount of kind of cushion. So that cushion is authorized pursuant to state law. So basically, there's a statute called the Municipal Finance Act that has a section that's just on authorization to levy taxes, and particularly with respect to municipal securities, which these bonds are. And it says basically for voted bond issues, and you'll see that's that point, section 701.1. You take into account, what estimated collections will be sufficient to pay when due interest and the portion of the principal falling due in that next year. So again, as we talked about, and we know that dollar amount as soon as we sell the bonds, right? Because fixed interest rates, you know exactly what your principal and interest payments are going forward for the life of the bond issue, unless we refinance them at a later date, like Sean talked about, after that 10-year kind of call protection, which the district has done. We did that in 2017. But you can keep into account some estimated collections, right, as to do I have any other things, that delinquencies and things like that to keep in mind. There's also a corresponding federal tax provision that says, remember, we have these monies that are coming in, they're going into a debt retirement fund, and they can only be used to pay debt service on the bonds. That's what that tax is there for. It cannot be used for any other purpose other than paying debt service on the bonds. The IRS says that's fine. It's a dedicated sinking fund that's dedicated to repayment of that bond issue. And you're allowed to keep a cushion in there, but that cushion shouldn't exceed 1/12 of the prior year's principal. So again, keep in mind there's kind of two factors here in determining and keeping in mind when you're levying your tax on an annual basis. What do I think I need to generate the amount of money coming due each year? Because what you don't want to have happen is you estimate short and you got to come out of your general fund to cover that. That has happened, and it's okay if that happens. You can catch up in that next year. If there's a shortfall, you can catch up that next year. But you really kind of want to estimate to provide yourself some cushion so that you're not hitting the general fund in any particular year to cover that debt service payments. And then also keep in mind, there is a limit as to how much you should be maintaining in that fund based upon, 1/12. So a lot of times when you're doing these calculations, you're looking to see, hey, am I at 8.3% or below? That's 1/12 of your previous year's debt service requirement. And to the extent that you're above that, you want to reduce, you want to downsize the millage rate to get within those thresholds. So those are just factors to consider, not just on the initial series of bonds, but every year when you go to fill out your L4029 and budget for next year, you should be looking at, what do I owe in debt service? How much cushion do I want to build in based on delinquencies and other tax appeals? And is that all within what I already have in that debt retirement fund to be within that threshold of 112? Sorry, just one more thought on that. So that a lot of times what we see in districts is a fluctuation of interest rate, of millage rates every year, right? So because most of the time we're trying to do what's called level debt service, so that based upon some increase in taxable value, like Sean said, whether it be 3.3% in 1 year or 2.5% in another year, you're building in some increases in taxable value already, but for the most part, your debt service, what is payable each year, is going to be relatively level. And you can structure it to accomplish that. So that increases above that taxable value projection should result in a slight reduction annually of your millage rate. So just things to keep in mind annually as you set that debt service rate, that debt millage rate, of not only the state law requirement, but the federal tax law requirement.
Okay. I was hoping now to get into the specifics in section 3.3, the financial considerations, and then this is more of a comparison that Sean was starting to talk about. Types of bond sales, timing options, preliminary options. And then at the end, process for board approval, I've got that highlighted as well, so that we know next steps.
Drafts, but so this is, I'm sending around just some information we'll go through briefly to hit those points, and then on the left, on the other side is a draft financing calendar in detail with actual dates and things. Again, this is the first Tom's seen it, so Tom may have some changes or comments or some feedback, but just to give you all a general idea of the benchmarks and the things that we need to hit going through. So we'll get to that in a second. So the first 2 pages here really just kind of go through the overall benefits and considerations between a competitive and negotiated sale. Just giving some general background on that. We won't go too much detail, but in general, competitive sale versus a negotiated sale. Competitive sale, you pick a date and time where you're selling the bonds. You put out a notice of sale to investment firms and say, Grosse Pointe is selling this amount of bonds on this day at this time. Submit your bids. Then at that date and time, assuming it meets all your parameters, you accept bids and award to the lowest true interest cost. At times that can be the most transparent. It can also be somewhat rigid, right? So you pick a date, you pick a time, and if the market's off that day, you go with that date and time, and you take your bids, and assuming you can afford it, you do it. The other way is a negotiated sale where you bring an underwriter on up front, as we've contemplated or talked about as part of the financing team earlier in the transaction. They work as part of the financing team to then market the bonds to investors. You have a bond pricing where they go out into the market and say, Grosse Pointe Schools is selling these bonds at these rates. Please give us your orders, right? And then the Nuveen's and the PIMCOs and the State Farms and those folks put in orders for bonds at those rates. Depending on the demand, up or down, we will either reduce rates or increase rates to clear the market, and there's a little bit of a balance there and some back and forth. But those are the kind of 2 differences. So on the next page really talks about what we are recommending here. Looks like it's got bumped up, but given the timing considerations here, given the fact that we have a November election and we need to close these by December, prior to December 1st, the best path forward is a negotiated sale. And the whole idea of that is being able to bring somebody on board, get all of the work basically done leading up to this transaction and issuance, and then once the election results are known, good or bad, if it passes, then we print the document, go out, get this into the market, sell the bonds, and then close shortly thereafter, right? It just, if you try to do that with a competitive sale, it would be really, really challenging. So, just given that and given the nature, the district has in the past, issued negotiated bonds in 17, 19, and 21. So it's not a big departure from previous history, but, just given the timing constraints here, the negotiated sale is really, really the best.
Yeah, just to highlight the constraints on a competitive sale. So when Sean talks about publishing a notice, what ends up happening is there's a publication called the Bond Buyer, which is a national publication where we publish, and actually if the district wanted to do a competitive sale, and this is anybody that issues bonds in Michigan, that state law requires us to publish a notice in the paper at least 7 days prior to the actual sale date. So the Bond Buyer is the only national publication for bond sales, so you publish a week in advance of the actual sale date, but to get it in the paper, you've got at least 3-4 business days beforehand. So you're really almost 2 weeks before the actual sale date, where you're sending the notice to the paper, getting it reviewed, getting it published a week in advance. So the timing is almost a 2-week timing before you can actually sell your bonds in a competitive sale. As Sean said, that can be in a normal market where you've got tons of time to actually issue before your next tax levy. That can be a favorable way of selling your bonds. But you've picked a date, right? Now you can reject all your bids if the market is awful, or we had bond sales set for September 11th. Those didn't sell that day. The market was closed, and those issuers came back 2 weeks, 3 weeks, a month later and sold bonds at another date. But they had the opportunity to do that. They had time in their schedules to be able to do that. They weren't worried about having a tax coming up due. Because to be on the tax bill, to have a debt levy for the 2025 bonds, if we're going to issue, they have to be issued in November. So you have to have debt service issued to be able to levy a tax to support that, right? So because remember we talked about, you're looking at next year's debt service, and that's what's on the tax bill. That's what you're authorized to levy for on December 1. So to the extent that the district wants to proceed and do a series in November, regardless of the size, it would have to be delivered in November. So basically by November 26th, because the 27th is Thanksgiving, which is a Thursday, and your next business day is Monday, December 1st, I think. And it has to be delivered before December 1st. So that gives us basically, 3 weeks. Yeah, 3 weeks from the election to actually have the bonds sold and proceeds in hand.
And one other thing, just, a lot of times looking at negotiated competitive when the market is really efficient can be really helpful. But at times it can be volatile. And when you have some size, right, when you were looking at an issuance of $20, $30, $40 million, we call it PV1, present value of 1 basis point, right? So we had some sales that happened the week after the tariff announcement, and the market sold off tremendously. Those folks were, kind of selling bonds in an interest rate environment that was, 3/4 of a point higher than it was the week before. And so, when it's $3 million, $5 million, I mean, that's a movement, but that interest cost component isn't as much of that equation. When it's $40 million, or $20 million even, that's a big movement, right? And so, again, that's not necessarily the driver here. It's a timing constraint, but that is another kind of consideration when you think about, market timing and going forward.
Okay, so I just want to play out a scenario that very unlikely to happen, but just let's say that bond passes in November, and then for whatever reason we decide we're not ready, we're just not going to do it in November, so we don't issue any debt in November. Then there's nothing on our roll or on our
Your existing debt's still there.
existing debt. So we figure out what our millage needs to be for the next year without anything new added in November. That then does that restrain us? It doesn't restrain us. You tell me if I'm wrong. That doesn't restrain us from still issuing up to $120 million in bonds in the future. It's just that since you lost a cycle of tax, then what is likely to happen is that we'd have to impose a millage to pay the debt service on the new debt that we would add up to 120 million that could very well exceed the current 3.14.
Actually, I don't think it would actually exceed the 3.14.
What,
Depending on how you structured that next series and when you issued it.
But you might run into capitalized interest.
Yeah, and so there's a few scenarios here, but ultimately, if it didn't get issued by that December 1, then the district would lower its millage
Yep.
for that year, right? So you
Yep,
would have a
for
drop
26.
in
We drop, yeah.
this year, and then when the bonds were issued in the coming year, you would go back up to the 3.14.
And so what are the negatives around that?
Well, I mean.
One of them is capitalized interest.
Yeah, so
Could you
in
explain that
some of the timing is trying to time up the receipt of those, paying the bond and bond principal and interest with tax receipts. And so, one of the scenarios in here, say you wait and go in February. Well, having, and I know bondholders don't like it, there's probably a legal reason as well, but usually, you need to have an interest payment within a year, right? And so you need to be able to pay, and school bonds are payable November and May, just because of how the timing of tax receipts work, right? So you would have an interest payment in there that wouldn't be on the tax roll, so you would have to borrow from that up front. We estimate, depending on the scenario, so if it was $15 million, it'd be about $500,000 that you would have to borrow at the time of sale, and then you put it into the debt retirement account, and that would cover your first interest payment before the 3.14 would come back on the levy the next year.
So when
in
you think
other
about
words- go ahead.
sources and uses, there'd be a construction fund deposit, there would be the cost of issuance, and in that scenario, there would be capitalized interest because you're issuing debt to cover the first interest payment. So there would be another use for whatever that November 1, 2026 interest payment would be. You'd cover that from the bond proceeds. So basically, it's a reduction as to what would go into the construction fund based upon that dollar,
Maybe a bad
potentially.
analogy, but the way I always think of it is you take out a loan and then you use the loan to make the payment on the loan. So you
Yeah.
eat into the proceeds you have to do whatever it is you needed to do. In this case, we had $500,000 or $1 million
So
less
more
money to
proceeds.
spend on construction or whatever because we had to use it to pay the debt service.
But we're already levying that 3.14 for December, correct?
Well, in
Well, I
some of
mean,
this-
you can adjust that still. You can make an adjustment to that.
We can on the 4029, but, so I'm glad you asked that, because my question is, if we didn't lower it, if it didn't pass and we didn't lower it, could we utilize that additional to continue to pay the existing debt on the books?
For-
So that we could continue to do a no new mill if it didn't pass for next year.
Up to 1/12 of the debt retirement fund.
So that's going to be the issue, is that the fund balance in that account, in the debt account, if you were to levy 3.14, would more than exceed what, reasonable retainage would be from a state or a tax, or a state or a federal
So
tax
you're telling us
perspective.
that we definitively would have to lower it if it doesn't pass and change all our municipalities, because it's a little bit different than what we've been told, so I'm not concerned about that.
I believe an
If the bond didn't
amended,
pass, or if you didn't sell the new first series of bonds.
Or if you didn't sell enough to cover,
Right.
to get to the 3.14. So there's a couple scenarios where that is the case, where you are telling your municipalities that we don't need to levy the 3.14. If it doesn't pass, because again, you're not gonna have debt service to show, to cover, the dollars that you generate are gonna be more than sufficient to cover that debt service. And you're gonna exceed some of those other limitations. There's also a scenario if you issue, depending upon how much you issue, that you don't need all of that, depending upon what's already there in that retirement fund. So there's a likelihood, there's a possibility that you're gonna be reducing that.
If it doesn't pass, if you don't sell in November, or if you don't sell enough in November, it's likely, any of those three scenarios would play into you needing to reduce the millage rate for next year.
What if you sold the bonds later, say in June, July, August, September, just to try and get timing correct? I mean, it doesn't sound like we have a lot we can spend this summer anyway.
so, and that's another scenario we've got here, we'll get to in a minute, but, yeah, so you would essentially wait till perhaps mid-May or summer of next year to do it, but you would still obviously lower your millage this year, because the 3.14 would be too much, and then the following year, the December 26th levy would go back up to 3.14.
So you could do all that. If the
Yes.
bond passes, you could, how long do you have once the bond, let's say it passes in November, How long do you have to issue the 120 million?
There's no expiration for the authority of the bond proposal. So you could wait a year, you could wait 2 years. Now again,
We helped the district a couple of years ago. They were in the middle of the bond and they wanted to go out for the next bond. And they did, and then they waited 2 years before they actually issued.
And did they do that so they could take advantage of the no additional taxes, which it's more likely to pass on?
And for them, it was just the time they were closing a school, building a new school, consolidating, doing a bunch of different things, and they thought the timing was right politically to go out on the ballot. So they did. That happens sometimes.
and keep in mind, when you do your next series, you're gonna look at, well, what proceeds do I have left to my first series, right? So you're gonna, as you time these things through, you're looking at, you know, what do my draw schedules look like for each series? And so what we're always asking as bond counsel is, when you do that second series, well, how much is left of the first series? And what does your draw schedule look like for the second series? Just to make sure we're complying with those, again, those same 5%, 85% rules for each series of bonds. But, you know, back to your question, there's no requirement to issue at any particular time, and there's no requirement to issue 1, 2, or 3, or 4 series. So that's a determination that the board can make depending on all these factors that you're considering, including, well, when do you actually need money for paying, you know, various professionals that
Yeah, I'd say minimally we'd need $1 million to $2 million to pay design fees and engineering fees and due diligence and some other things we'd need to do for the first 6 to 9 months. Somewhere between $1 million to $2 million.
So the
Minimally.
Yeah,
summary
we
of
can just
alternative
probably
is
put it
page
there.
11.
Yeah, we can just skip to that
Yeah, we
if you
jump
guys
ahead.
want.
Yeah.
One, just, like man on the street trying to figure this out.
It's complicated.
No, just like if we, just say we issued 45 million in November, and we're not really spending that right out of the chute because we're hiring a construction manager, we're putting it into an account that's earning us interest. Okay, now the payment of the debt is through the debt service. The payment of that is through the millage.
Correct.
That interest that we would earn on the amount that's sitting in an account, that gets, is it additive to the total
We're allowed to spend.
that you're allowed to spend?
Yes.
Yes, so earnings in your construction fund are considered, they're treated the same way as bond proceeds.
So that.
So it's for project purposes.
Well, but it doesn't, we're still at 120. Like it doesn't say 120 plus the
It
interest that
is, plus the interest.
Yeah, so it's, yeah, so that's on top of,
you. Okay.
yes,
So you could, it doesn't take away from a later,
authorization, correct, it does
Authorization.
not, it does not. Only the premium component of it when, in your initial sale.
Yeah.
Right, because there were times where people weren't earning anything in those construction funds. I mean, we had,
Sure.
you
There
know,
are just rules about not speculating and not trying to turn it into an investment.
You can't buy Bitcoin. No.
Right.
exactly, right. Well, I mean, you're restricted as to what you can invest in under state law purposes for bond proceeds, but also, I don't want to dive into the weeds on arbitrage, rebate and stuff like that, but that's something that, you know, the IRS, unless you spend money fast enough, they'll let you earn up to the yield on your bonds, right? So even though we have a coupon of 5%, your yield might be 3.5% or 4%. You can earn,
We paid the arbitrage on the 2021 bonds.
right, so you can earn up to whatever the yield is, let's just say in that scenario, it's 3.5%. If you earn 5% and you don't meet any of these spend down exceptions that they call, where you're spending your money fast enough within these 6-month intervals, either within 18 months or 2 years, the difference, so let's just say you earn 5% and your yield is 3.5%, that 1.5% is called arbitrage. And the IRS says, I'll let you keep the up to the 3.5% as part of your project. You can use that as just like the proceeds. But the 1.5%, if you've earned it over that period of time, that needs to be rebated back to the IRS on the 5th anniversary of the bond. So let's just say we did a series in 2025, you earned arbitrage for the 3 years you had those proceeds. That, at the end of that 3-year period, you'll do a calculation that says, I'm gonna owe in 2 years X amount of dollars to the IRS because I earned above the yield on the bonds and I didn't meet any spend down exceptions.
can you give it back to the taxpayers?
No, it goes to the IRS.
Well,
But to the extent that happens, though, oftentimes it comes up that this is a bad thing, but it means you're maximizing for every penny that you get, right? Because you're borrowing at a rate and you're earning at that above that rate. So obviously you have to give something back, but those two cancel out. There are some nuances here, and we'll just talk about this briefly. So we've got quite a few scenarios here, but
This is page 11.
yes, sorry. So the top one here is kind of a hybrid, considering what if the bond passes and you want it and you do issue in November of 25. There is a caveat, and Tom will know more details about this, but for qualified school construction projects, $15 million or less is exempt under arbitrage. So if you kept your total proceeds less than $15 million, that kind of ceiling for earnings rate is not necessarily there. Now, there's some caveats, I think, with how much of the project is qualified school construction. But to the extent that table 1A, if you felt there weren't enough projects to spend quickly or to do whatever, perhaps borrowing $15 million up front would maximize the most of that, right? So you would see a pretty considerably higher interest rate, and we're just estimating here for 3.5% versus something let's say 2.75 later on, right? So
that's going to be my question: why we were getting 3.5 in that example, and it's because of this $15 million exemption.
yeah, that's exactly right. So you do get a little bit more, but if you compare that now, so then we did kind of a middle ground here at table 1B, which is a $25 million issuance. At 275, so say there was projects, and a lot of this will come from the PMR folks, but say, you could substantiate $25 million in borrowing this November, you're going to expect it to even generate, over $1 million in investment income there. And then the third one would be the $45 million, 45, 45, 30, which, even at a 275, which is certainly below the interest rate of the bonds, that's almost $2 million in investment earnings over, let's say, 2 years in doing the project, in the bank that goes to additional projects, right? So we talk about kind of, yes, there is that upfront interest cost, but these are also real, project dollars that are going to your, to your project account based on that. And so, you can see they're really pretty close, right? Most of them maximize, proceeds for funds, but if you've got, say, 120 million between either 1A or 1C, you're looking at $122.7 million in funds available for the project. So going back to why would you do it now? Why would you get it done now? As you get those funds in the bank, you start paying costs of issuance, or start paying for projects, start doing that stuff, and that money is additional funds available for the projects. Kind of going to some of the other scenarios here, and apologies, the far right column and the last four should be 3.14 because you'll see here, so if the district perhaps went with a February of 2026 issuance, like you said, right, wait till February, you capitalize an interest payment, which is about $525,000. We project that would be lowering the 25 debt millage to about 2.25 mils. And then in 26, that would come back up to 3.14. Again, so the 2A really just shows if you did 15 million, right, just to get the project started. Again, you're gonna be able to earn at a higher rate, have interest costs or interest generated, but it does project that you would lower that millage and then the next year increase it again. To the other point that was made earlier, say you wait until May of next year and you do that again, you issue 15 million again, say that does it, or you do another option here of 25 or 45, that kind of also gives you, you can still do the bond program, you kind of jockey your millage around, but this is how we see it coming out. And again, all of these are pretty close in terms of $122.5 million in available funds for the project. The one other thing kind of, think through, again, to their point is, when can you spend it? How can you, make the most on the interest that you, are earning in your project fund? The other thing with these table 3A through 3C is, we do have 20-year bond terms, so that would be extending that one bond an additional year, right? So everything's going out one more year because, if you move it to May of 26, then the final maturity 20 years out is another year later. So, in terms of just overall, interest cost, it's going to be a little bit higher than some of the comparisons, yeah. So I know there's a lot of numbers on here, but just kind of wanted to lay out the gamut of options, depending on what's best. And I know the folks from PMR have plenty to discuss on that, but.
So between like 1A, 2A, 3A, you're changing the timing, but for purposes of this analysis, you maintain like a steady, constant interest rate.
Except in 1A, where you get the exemption bump in
Right.
the investment.
Yeah.
Yep. So 1A, 2A, and 3A.
But I mean, in terms of like what
Yes.
the bonds would be,
Yeah.
would be the
Yep. And
the rate on the bonds would be the same here.
yep.
That's assuming nothing crazy happens.
Assuming
between now and
nothing
then.
changes.
Yeah,
Nothing
and
changes
I
in
know we
that.
skipped ahead of it, but there's, sorry, I have to jump around here, but if we go, let's just say, we'll just hit this quickly. So page 7 just gives you a brief update of where municipal rates have gone in the last 3 months. Green is good, red is bad or away. You can see it's been a pretty good, summer and early fall. We had some really good weeks there. You can see though, for the most part, our market moves 3 to 5, maybe 10 basis points a week, or something less, right? But you can see here, even from the end of June through last week, let's see, around 60, 70 basis points on the front end, and about 30 basis points on the long end of the curve. So definitely has improved since let's say the start of summer. The next page, we like this. It's we use it often. Again, this is crystal ball. If I had a crystal ball, I wouldn't be here. But trying to get an understanding of what folks think the interest rates are going to do in the future. And so J.P. Morgan, provides this on a weekly basis. But short-term rates, 2-year, 5-year MMD, which is our AAA tax-exempt benchmark. That's kind of our indices that we spread and price off of. Looks to remain stable and relatively unchanged through quarter 2 of 2026. The long-term rates are expected to increase modestly between now and second quarter of 2026, and the Fed funds rate here is expected again to decrease by 0.75 of a point by the end of 26. I can't reiterate enough, these are projections. I can't tell you how many times we got this and we would think things are going great and then all of a sudden a tweet would come out and things would move, or it is just kind of taking in market technicals. This is where one of the largest investment banks has their rate forecast going forward.
I'm sorry.
This is the best one for Lehman, by the way. I like
Yeah.
this one.
And then the next page, just to kind of, I know, we hear much about the Fed funds rate and the Fed's cutting rates and what does that do? What does that do to our rates? The market does move, and particularly on the short end, but as you can see here, very different kind of interactions, right? The green here is our 15-year AAA benchmark BBL, MMD, same thing, 2 different companies, but same tax-exempt benchmark, right? You can see that moves, and obviously, the Fed funds rate was very low. It increased, and then from 20 to 22 it was very low. It was actually below what a 15-year borrowing on a municipal bond would be. So, but now you can see kind of when the yield curve inverted in mid 22 through 24. The short end of the curve, the Fed funds rate, the interbank borrowing rate was much higher than a 15-year bond, but they don't move in lockstep. Our industry is informed by that, but certainly don't always go in the same direction.
So could you just explain what we say on page 7? Fed bad, green good. What do you mean by that?
Yeah, sorry, and that's so as a borrower, you want lower rates in our market. when rates come down, that means, lower cost of fund, that's a rally, that means more money's coming in. And so the green just indicates when our index is going down in terms of rate. Red is when money moves out of the market, treasuries and, are selling off or going, treasuries, BVAL, MMD are going up, right? So as a borrower, you want to see more green, you want to see rates going down because that's going to lower your cost of funds. And, there's also supply demand, aspect of that, right? So if rates are going down, that means demand for bonds is high, which means money's coming into the market, which means your bonds are attractive. If rates are going up, that means money's coming out of the market and it might be harder to sell. So, obviously there's the math of it, but there's also the supply and demand of interest in, inflows and outflows in the muni market.
So if we price this and you have these recommendations, and I think on page 12, you've got information on 4% versus 5%. If you pick, you could try and sell on these dates that we're talking about in November, and it just doesn't sell, correct? Like that's, we underprice it, we go 4%, the market doesn't like it, we're not raising the funds. Then
So
what do you do?
Well, that's one, we talked about it kind of last week, but you want to have a good financing partner and a bank that is willing to put their balance sheet to work and step up and buy those bonds. When we go into a bond pricing, there'll be a bond purchase agreement, which Tom may be able to talk about, but that is essentially an agreement after the pricing that the underwriter is going to buy those bonds at those rates on a certain date. And so when you go into the pricing, we will negotiate with them on where rates are. And ultimately, if let's say 9/11 or something bad happens, you pull it, and then we're pretty tight on time here, but maybe the next day's better. So you have a tiny bit of wiggle room there. But for the most part, you want a financing partner that's going to not say, hey, we got to go up 15 basis points. They're going to say, hey, we'll underwrite 20 million of these. We're going to have to increase the 20, 30 and these other maturities by 3 to 5 basis points to get some other orders in the book, and we've got a deal. And at that point, they sign an agreement, the district signs an agreement to sell the bonds, and you're getting your money.
That's if you go the competitive route. The negotiate route.
Correct.
If you do competitive, you're just putting it out there and see if it sells.
Yep. That's exactly it.
On that page 7, what are the rows? Tenor?
Sorry, it's not the first. Those are the maturity years. So 1 year, 2 year, 3 year, 4 year. So at the bottom here, I've just got treasuries, which is the taxable market, which again doesn't move in lockstep, but does move generally in the same direction. Those are the 1 year treasury, 2 year, 3 year, 5 year, 10, 20, and 30 year treasuries.
Okay.
So if you were to kind of plot out a 20-year issue,
Yeah, okay.
just look kind of in that
Yeah,
far right
yeah.
column, I was like, generally that's what the rate is currently, right? And then the column before that was how much it moved since June of 23, favorably, right? So
Correct.
the market improved within each maturity, those individual basis points
Mhm.
throughout that, which was a significant improvement in the market in the last.
Yeah, if we were to look at this, let's say from
Well, spring was a lot different.
March
Yeah.
to end of May, it was a lot of red. We had a graph, but like I said, the tariff announcement, we had movements of 40, 50 basis points in one day, up and down, right? And so when you have that much volatility, the market is not efficient. Folks aren't, because investors are obviously putting their money up, and if it moves 2 to 3 basis points, that's a moderate movement, they'll get it back. If it moves 40 basis points, they're not going to want to. That's a lot of risk for them. So
Yeah, we had sales scheduled during that time period, some competitive that we decided, on the schedule, we were gonna try to sell on this date, and we decided, let's just wait a couple weeks. The district could afford to wait a couple weeks. It was well within the time period where they needed to get their, the tax levy information, so they waited a couple weeks, and it was well worth it because the market moved, I don't remember exactly how many basis points, but it was probably 25, 30 basis points
right.
in just that 2-week period favorably.
Yep.
So,
Okay, so if I'm reading this correctly, then as of 10 days ago, for a 20-year issue, AAA 20-year issue, the market pricing had it at 3.92.
Correct, so that is the benchmark.
Yep.
So that is a AAA tax exempt 5% coupon bond. There is a credit spread based on a credit rating to that. Anywhere probably in that range of 35 to 50 basis points, depending on coupon, right? So, that would be on top of that. So, 4.3%, 4.4 maybe, for that specific maturity, right? And as you'll see, you sell principal maturities in each and every year, and so that yield moves with the tenor of the bonds.
Yeah, so even though we talk about coupon rates, 4%, 5%, your yields
Yep.
are gonna look more like
Yeah,
this,
more like
right?
that.
So, and that's what then generates the premium that we've talked about, right? The
Right.
difference between that coupon rate and that yield will generate that premium. If the yield's lower than the coupon rate, it's gonna generate premium. If it's the same, then it's just a par bid, but then obviously if it's above that, it's a discount. So,
And what is the benefit of saving like a 5% coupon versus a 4.5% coupon from a market or an underwriter perspective?
Yeah, and so we can jump to page 12, and there's a lot of numbers on this, but, I should have redacted this. This is one that we recently did for Hudsonville, but, it shows when we go into pricing, one of the benefits of kind of our team is, we'll look at different coupon options, right? So you can see here a 5% coupon scale with certain, yields and spreads, let's say, 20, 40, 15 years out. This is an A plus underlying, so 55 basis points. Something a sub 5, might be 80 basis points, right? But there's other math that goes into a yield to call versus yield to maturity, but kind of looking at those two, and then at the bottom here, weighing that into is it worth getting a lower rate today just to take it in hand, or is it worth paying maybe a slightly higher rate on this and knowing I'm going to be able to refinance that in 10 years, right? And so it's kind of looking at the differences between those and trying to find the right market. Oftentimes, as I said, investors like 5% coupons because it provides themselves interest rate protection, and so those are more liquid. You tend to get better, more interest. The big guys, especially, if you're going to sell $40 million of bonds, you want the PIMCOs, the Nuveen's, the State Farms. Those folks generally like 5% coupons, big block sizes, those kind of things, and they can come in and buy a whole deal, right? And so some of it is matching to investor preferences, but some of it's also making sure that the numbers make sense and that, if you weigh the future optionality or future benefit, that, the 5% coupon might be better today.
Okay, and so we would say even in a scenario where rates, even now, rates plummet, go down to 2%.
Yeah.
If we issued at 5%, that still might be a good idea that we would get a significant premium on that issuance, and
Yeah. Yeah, no, I mean.
So the yield ultimately, or the yield is
And-
ultimately closer to what the current pricing is.
Right, and you can see here there's a price column on this that shows, between 101 to, 115. So, if that yield went down, that reoffering yield went down, that price would go way up. So you would issue less par because you would get more premium
Right.
and get to the same point.
Yeah.
And still, but in a lower interest rate environment like in, I think, 21, the 3% coupons, I think is what you issued then, made a lot of sense. Sure. Because you could lock in, that low cost of funds. And, if you're locking in 3% for 20, 30 years, you don't really have to worry about refinancing. So there is kind of a balance, but 3% coupons, 2% coupons really aren't favorable right now. There's not a lot of demand for them. They're hard to sell. So this is kind of the two kind of paths.
How long is the sales period for?
So that's a good question. We will generally have a call in the morning about 9:15. There'll be pre-marketing leading up to that, and then they will usually want to go out in the market. Usually after the economic indicators come out, let's say 10 o'clock, run an order period for an hour and a half. The Andreas, Dr. Tuttle and Andrea will have access, and I imagine you guys would if you wanted to as well, but there's usually an order an order monitor, so you can see orders come in as they come. It's kind of fun, but you can see the whole maturity, and then you see like Nuveen put in an order in 2035, or State Farm's here, or PIMCO's here, and then you can see that fill up, and then if you're oversubscribed, then you're going to reduce yields and kind of shake the book and try and get some folks out of it, and get the deal done. So, but probably about an hour and a half, all things going right.
And then you'll have another call.
Yep.
So, as Sean was saying, they're working for the district to make sure that the rates are as low as possible, and they're negotiating with whoever your underwriter is, right? So once there's and there's discussions, obviously, that PFM's having with the district as to where we think rates are, as it's comfortable, where that all levels out, where bids come in. At the end of the day, there's going to be, as Sean indicated, kind of a verbal agreement of, yeah, we're comfortable with where these are, and then the underwriter says, yeah, I'll agree to buy them, all of the bonds, at these rates, these coupon rates, and at these yields. And that's where this bond purchase agreement comes into play, where it would be authorized by the board resolution to sign a bond purchase agreement. And simply, in its simplest form, it's your underwriters offer to buy those bonds at those rates under these conditions. And then the authorization is to sign that agreement that day, because what ends up happening is they've taken all those orders in that morning, and they want to be able to, either by the end of that day or early the next day, know that they have a written agreement, and then they can actually settle their tickets with their investors. The rates are set right then and there. And then all we do from there on out is get closing documents ready to go, circulated, signed, and the closing memo and bond proceeds are in within 2 weeks. You actually have the dollars in your construction fund within 2 weeks of that sale date, under the current schedule.
And to the extent that you get out there and maybe you offer $40 million and you only have orders for 30, they underwrite that, so they take that on their balance sheet. That you get the 40, you get what you went out with, and then they try to sell off those bonds over time, right? So, like I said, if you have a larger deal, it helps to have a bank with a little bit of a larger balance sheet.
And that's regardless of, that's a negotiated sale regardless of timing, right? Like that's a normal negotiated sale process. That's not unique to something that we need to get done within this. If this decision is made to do a negotiated sale, whether you do an issue now or next year or the second series, that's the normal process for a negotiated sale.
So on page 11, if we can revisit page 11, I think there's a couple things to highlight just to frame the conversation in terms of actually making a decision. So the net bond proceeds, the third column, obviously that's critical. There's the $15 million exemption that impacts the investment earnings and whether there's a cap and arbitrage there. The estimated available project funds, 2, 4, 6, 7th, right under the word alternatives. That's the biggest thing to me, at least as a starting point. How much money are we actually putting into projects? How much are we actually putting into the buildings and the different facilities? That's a key number, not the only important number, but the first one I would look at is how much are we actually utilizing, and then estimated interest cost, the far right dollar amount column. So, to me, unless I'm thinking of this in the wrong way, I would want to maximize the available project funds in that middle column underneath the bid alternatives, and I'd like to minimize the estimated interest cost to the greatest extent possible. So to me, the best two options just from that framework are Table 1A with 15 million November issuance and Table 3A, 15 million May issuance. So then the difference, and you can compare the numbers, I jotted them down here, but the difference then becomes the time and implementation, and that's what we would have to talk to Clint, Moran, and Ben about, is what is the impact of waiting until May to get some of those front-end funds in terms of actually creating change that we can see in the community. So I'm not saying those are the only two, I'm just saying that I was spending a little bit of time here doing those comparisons. I think those are the key numbers, and I would start the conversation there. To me, the best two options are Table 1A and Table 3A. If there are any other thoughts.
Yeah, I agree. But I think table 1B is also of interest to me, just based on the lowest interest to pay back by the taxpayers. But I would say that your analysis is exactly how I think we should look at it with the, do we get enough money to pay for what we're doing? And then do we have the most efficient tax payment system back for our taxpayers?
Yeah, because I homed in on 1B too, because it is that lowest interest cost.
The trade-off there is 900 in the lifetime interest cost, again, all assumptions, being the same. Yes, 900K gets saved, but 600 of that comes from the estimated project funds. So we are saving interest, but the available project funds also go down by 600,000.
Yep.
So we're taking 600,000 out of the buildings. And again, to me, I start with maximizing in that column. How much money are we putting into our facility?
And the other factor is with 3A, you do modify the mill rate for next year.
Correct.
Which is, I guess, good. It goes down for next year, but then it's going to have to come back up. But it wouldn't have to come back up. We could manage it to keep it at the 314.
Yeah, given these projections.
But then you're also just delaying the actual work.
Right, it's the implementation timing then,
Yes.
is what we're talking about.
Yeah.
What's the headache to the district in having the millage right now set for December 3.14 and having to pull that back?
Well, it's just getting the L4029 and getting to the municipalities and telling them and.
Making sure they don't have their tax bill. I don't know how much advance notice they need for when they prepare their tax
So we can
bills
pull that
for
back,
12
they're not going to take those taxes out and we have to put them back to the taxpayers. We can still pull back.
I don't think so, Tom. I think we have enough
Yeah, I
time.
mean, I think we
to-
have-
It's all the I've never done it this way, so I don't know how the municipalities.
It's a unique situation. This
Yeah,
is
I don't know how the municipalities
often
act.
just-
Yeah, it just comes
They're
down
not gonna
to,
be happy.
Yeah.
but at the end of the day, I mean, from a state law perspective, they have, to the extent that you get approved and you want to have that as part of the millage, they have to include that in the millage, they have to give them the tax. So I think part of the question becomes, when do they actually prepare their tax bills and send them out and things like that? So we'll want to get to them quite soon after it passes, or even say, hey, by the way, depending upon what the board's process is and thought process of maybe giving them a heads up that there's a possibility that we might need to make an adjustment to it.
On the election, could we?
Yeah, they're aware
Yeah.
because it's on
Yeah,
ballot, right?
exactly right.
Mhm.
So,
I'll make friends with them my first 2 weeks here.
yeah, right, so,
Macro, I mean, it could be a millage reduction for next year, but the estimated interest costs, you still have to pay ultimately you have to pay back these bonds.
sure. Yeah.
So
And-
it might be,
Sorry, go ahead.
well, you might see this dip in 1 year, but ultimately that just means another year's been tacked on back in.
Well, the first year interest cost, the total interest cost in May issuance is favorable 300,000, bottom line. Top line, estimated interest cost in year one in the 2026 series is significantly higher, 2 million higher on the front end. So we're going to grab that lower tax or the lower millage in December of '25, we're going to keep it high on the back end once we issue those because of the interest costs, as you see on the top line. Right?
And we,
Dollar today's
yeah, I mean, okay.
20 years from now, right?
Yeah, I mean, you're moving principal out. I mean, we can make it work at that. But you're having a longer average life, which if you have more principal on the back end, you're going to pay a higher rate. So it's within reason now. I mean, to project where rates are going to be next. Next May is kind of up in the air, but like you said, you're tacking another year of payments on. I mean, you're just moving it from that to the back. So.
John, I'm just going to ask again, because I must have misunderstood Carrie when she and I talked. Is this true or false? If this bond does not pass, we have no opportunity to go for another new mill tax increase next year. Is that correct?
3.14.
at the 3.14. I want to make sure I understand that because at one point Carrie said actually we did have an opportunity and now I'm hearing you say we don't. So I'm a little confused about that.
Yeah, it is a really hard question, and some of it comes to judgment. But if you are talking from a strict tax perspective and the funds in there and asking the question, it should be lowered and not.
So if you want to ask me that question.
Yeah, I know.
Sorry,
I'm so glad you're all on the same
bus
one
here.
because I'm
Because I
confused about that.
I mean,
Yes.
again, we have to look at, you're only allowed to levy what you're allowed to levy to pay debt service. So, and you have to take into account what funds you've already collected for debt. And that's straight out of the Municipal Finance Act. So I think if the bond doesn't pass, you have to reduce that millage.
Which is how I understood it, but I thought I heard Carrie say at one point, and I didn't quite
there-
understand.
There is, so again, that's from a specific tax perspective. However, to Tom's point earlier, talking about, if you have taxable value growth, oftentimes you will lower your millage. Sometimes districts strategically, not for long periods of time, will hold them at their millage to go out for a no mill increase because that no mill increase has probably an 80% passage rate as compared to increasing your millage. Decreasing it and asking for one or more mills in the future that maybe has a 30 to 50% chance. Strict and by the books, there would be too much of a buildup of funds at the 3.14 level. However, is it done? Districts do it.
And that's
That's
why I asked, I mean,
right.
because that's a
Which is
big
why the
question.
most important thing to do is make sure the bond passes.
It has to pass, or else we're kind of in a really,
Right.
If you look at May and August, we had a lot of bonds fail, right, that were increases.
I think 1 out of 13 in one of those cycles, 1 out of 2 in the other. It's been really, the numbers have been going down for a while with inflation and tariffs and some of the other turmoil going on.
And the other thing too is, I don't know if there'd be concerns from the community of, saying, hey, our bill was, $225 this
Of course
year.
that's it.
Next year, why did my taxes go
You
up,
have to
right? You
explain
said this
that.
is no mill.
Right.
I think some of it comes down to discretion and understanding, your constituents. But just from a numbers and kind of legal perspective, those are the parameters.
because people are asking, if the mill doesn't pass, do my taxes go down?
They always ask that question.
Okay, and then the second question I still don't have an answer to. In fact, I just emailed Carrie again to say, I need you to answer this for me. Are there any opportunities to go for a no mill increase next year?
And you're saying no.
You're saying absolutely not.
I mean,
Somebody has to do the math to figure out how much it would have to fall, right?
I
And
guess.
all that discussion relates to the buffer, the 112 buffer that you can carry in your.
Correct.
Right.
That's
But if it fell a tenth, that's different than if it fell a point, right? As far as what it would generate in the future.
Right.
I'm just having a hard time answering that question to the community, and nobody seems to be able to give me an answer, so I'm fumbling with it a little bit.
Okay, let's go back to this, where you have the 3.14 for the 1A, 1B, 1C, and then you have down to 2.25. That 2.25, that's not, would that be the millage going forward? That would not be the millage going forward throughout the life of the
Correct.
20.
Correct,
That'd
yep,
be
and
1
sorry,
year.
and that was our, the typo on the 26, that would go up to 3,
It would go back up to 3.14.
3.14.
Yep.
Yeah.
The far right column should be 3.14 from
Gotcha.
2A down.
Right.
Yep.
And that's 20, in that column, I think should be 2027.
Well, so,
That's when it would come back
In-
up. Like
in
it would
this-
go down to 2.25
so
for 2026. and then
the
come back.
25 tax year, which is the 26 fiscal year, so it's kind of,
Okay.
because you're
That
at
December.
December levy,
Okay.
it backs up. So
Okay.
another point is, we could say levy year. That would-
Yeah, put December above the 2 years,
Yeah.
and I think it makes more sense.
This December would be 0, the next December would be 2.25, the next one would be 3.14.
This December would be
The 2.25.
2.25, next year would be 3.14.
Correct.
Okay.
Or,
would go up after
again,
the
so this is just an estimate at this point,
Right.
but in that ballpark.
Yep, okay.
don't know why you're struggling so much.
I get to stand on the stage and answer the question.
Well, the answer
I'm
is
gonna
always
say-
going to go down, it's just
Yes.
how much and how
Yes.
fast, and
It will go
eventually
down.
it's going to go down.
It will go down, but by how much and when is discretion.
Which is why
So I'm just
districts
gonna
work.
ask again, there'll be, true or false, no opportunity to go for no new mill tax increase after this election. True?
If it does not pass, correct.
I mean, you'd have to keep it at what it went down to, right? I mean,
But then
which-
we might be violating
Yeah.
7
So
point-
the answer is true.
701 of
No,
Act
I'm saying,
34.
but if it failed and you reduced the
Lowered
millage,
it, you
right?
could issue and keep the millage at the
You'd
lower
have-
rate.
Then if you want to say,
But we
no,
wouldn't-
it
but-
goes
But 120 is
back to
the-
the-
Want to hit that,
And we
But-
could raise
we
it.
would get the full 120.
You
Right,
would.
no.
Right, so,
But maybe it wouldn't fall all the way to 225.
Right.
Maybe it
Correct.
falls-
Yeah, there's some discretion there.
that would not allow you,
Right.
using that millage rate wouldn't raise the 120.
Right, this year is the max, to maximize proceeds, for sure. This year.
And,
Right.
and success rate.
to keep the millage rate level, it has to pass.
Correct.
Otherwise, there's going to be a change in millage rate.
That's wonderfully ambiguous.
I don't know if we even need to get into our stuff, it was really more about what projects we thought would go first, second, and
No,
third, but
I am interested
really
in
more
the
about the money.
timing from you and from Ben. If we chose this Table 3A, this May issuance timeline, what's the difference between that and a November issuance?
For project-wise,
Right, from a implementation
pure
standpoint,
project-wise,
not a funding standpoint at all.
pure project-wise, nothing. The only thing I would say to that is technology. We could purchase technology. That's the only
In which case,
project.
I'm sorry, which one is,
So if we don't sell the bonds till May, we have to
Yeah,
come out
either
of
I guess
pocket
so.
essentially for anything we want to spend between now and when we get the proceeds in June or whatever it would be. So if that's $2 million bare minimum or $1.5 million bare minimum,
so the plan doesn't change, we borrow and then pay it back, like you guys said, borrow and then.
but
pay
then
it
you
back.
wouldn't be able to do additional projects like maybe some tech or some playgrounds or
Yeah, but that's February.
furniture or whatever it would be.
February, where you're doing the capitalized interest, that's the only,
No, I'm looking at May.
oh, okay,
February.
yeah.
February is
But
not.
to the extent that projects start prior to May,
It would lower the amount of
design
projects we
fees.
do in 2027, I would say, to some extent, right? Because you have less money in the bank, which means you can do less projects the first year. We'd be all in design for 2026. 2027 would probably be our first heavy lift of projects for the district. But, I mean, depending on what,
Yeah, I think 27 is the big lift either way, but any of the smaller things you wanted to get a jump on, some furniture, some tech, some whatever it would be, some equipment, you'd have to wait.
So there would be a difference in implementation, relatively minor in terms of large-scale projects.
The bigger thing I worry about is just the gamble of rates staying where we think they're gonna be versus having sold them already. Just because the market's done some weird thing. I know you got a better beat on it than I do, but I've seen rates go 5 to 2 and back up again. It's like, oh, holy shit, what's going on?
or on
Pardon
both
my
sides,
French.
right?
I mean, I started with that same thought process, but the 45 million option, 1C,
source one.
is 3 million more in estimated interest cost and is, slightly lower in the available project fund. It stays level approximately in how much we invest in the schools, but it's 3 million more in interest costs.
And keep in mind, every issue you have, you still have that 5% question, right? So if you're at 45 million,
Yeah.
your 5% threshold is much higher than some other iteration of that. So make sure that you're still satisfying of entering into contracts within that 6 months to spend 5% of that number.
And then Sean, so are you saying that I shouldn't worry so much about that estimated interest cost over the life of the program because of our availability, our ability to refinance in 10 years?
So that's a really good point. Yeah, I mean, this, in 10 years, if you issue these at 5% coupons, it's, I don't want to say a certainty, but there is a almost certainty that you'll be able to refinance them. And 10 years also happens to generally be a good mark for, capital programs, right? What you need now, you don't know what you need in 10 years, right? And so you do kind of have that, that option to call those in. And so again, this is just the interest cost if these were not touched and issued, today. But in some of that, difference in interest costs between those two, I mean, yes, it does, there is more associated with that, 1C, but if you look at that over the life of the bond program, I would sway against letting that influence more so, the options of timing and proceeds and, when you can do projects. I think because a lot of that is projecting an interest cost over 20 years for 3 series. There's some estimates in that.
Is there from, like PFM, looking at from 1A down to 3C, is there what PFM sees as being the optimal choice?
I mean, I think a lot of it will come from, what you're comfortable with project spending, timing wise. Anytime, and just flatly saying it, anytime you have to lower your millage and then bring it back up, it's heartburn all around.
Right.
So if the timing works out and the election is successful and, part of putting this timeline together is to identify that this can be done and, we've got the steps and things put together to do it. If you can get started on it, I think it makes a lot of sense to get something at the 3.14 this year. However, you've got some other options to think about.
So how does that cash flow look to you guys for 1A and 1B? With 15 million in 2025 or 25 million in 2025? In terms of just these project spends, with what you guys just said as the timeline.
Yeah, I mean, we ran out a couple different scenarios, right? One at roughly $30 million and one at $45 million, which I think was the initial number. I mean, we can adjust it either way. I think the big heavy lift in the first couple of quarters is going to be onboarding your construction manager, your architect, any specialty consultants, and so
Some minor things, like you said, the boilers at Marcel supposed to be replaced, things like that, but
I think if we had 25 million, I think that would probably be enough to get to the next bond sale. If that was that 1B option. I think 25 would get us there. It could be that we'd bring bids to the board for an award recommendation to the board for more than we had actually sold, but we know that we're going to sell it in the spring or shortly thereafter.
Well, and one other point is that I know obviously you'll get to a point where you decide on what you're actually going to borrow or what, let's say 25 million. And when you come to the board, you're going to vote in a not to exceed amount, which Tom can talk about. But you do want probably some buffer in that amount. You won't go over it, but you don't want to get to a point where maybe things are more favorable or projects come online and all of a sudden you couldn't do them because you didn't issue enough, right? So there is a little bit of buffer in that amount.
But also keep in mind, for each series of bonds, we're going to come to the board for authorization.
Right.
We're not doing one and then authorizing these multiple series. We'll come to the board for every series that we issue.
And again, just the underwriter RFP said 45 million. Does that explain this at all?
When we after coming out here and talking about it and then talking with these folks, we did revise it to give an option to provide it at both ends of the spectrum. So up to $15 million for a fee quote and up to $45 million, and we can look at it both ways. So they'll be happy to do the business one way or the other. But yeah, so I wouldn't think of that as a barrier or a problem or a headache in any sense for this.
Okay, so this may be too detailed to answer right now. But I'm just curious between 1A and 1B. The second series in both cases. Okay, so for 1A, it's a second series of 75 million. It's 65 million in 1B. The investment earnings are dramatically higher on the 1A series for a relatively, I don't want to say small difference in bond proceeds, right? But it's not a significant percentage, but it's, it's like essentially double the investment earnings.
And that's because too, and this is another thing, if we did a November of 25 at 15 million, as you can see here, 2A, right? You've got February of 26, and then you've got something quicker in August of 27. I think that this probably November 27 is actually a longer draw schedule. So I think just because of the cash flow needs, that is probably, probably more of a May 2027, a May 2027 issue. And then you would have a longer kind of investment period. I'll double check that, but I'm fairly certain that should just say May of 27. That way, you've got between May of 27 and November of 30 to draw those funds, similar to kind of an August, so just a longer investment period for that. And a lot of that, again, will be driven from cash flow needs. You don't want to, if $15 million makes it from November of 25 to November of 27, then that makes sense. If it gets tight, then you move up the issuance, and assuming you've got the steps in place, you issue it in May of 27.
Yeah, there's a little bit of art to this as much as there's a science, because you're right, the longer the money sits there, the more interest you earn, but then it doesn't have the same buying power, so we're really trying to move fast, but not so fast that we upset the teachers and the students and tear all your buildings apart at once. At the same time, you're trying to guess what the market's going to do, and so these things are interesting for sure, especially when they get long, when they're 8 years or 10 years and 4 or 5 series, then you're really doing a lot of artwork to try to figure out, what's the school district even going to look like in 8 or 10 years, right? It's a whole other conversation. So.
Yeah, and all these second and third series, again, they show in November here, and here, they could be any time you need the money, right? So you're just gonna, again, with all the factors of what is that impact on
Or anytime the market.
millage rates. I mean,
To a degree.
my answer typically is you issue bonds when you need the money, and that's, which is driven by, I let these other guys kind of try to play market. I don't, because I'm not allowed to. So you look at, okay, when do I need funds based on what your draw schedule, what
Sure.
buildings do you need, and then what you have still, again, outstanding in bond proceeds from the prior issue too, so.
My point being more, we can move faster if the money's available, right? If the market's good and you can sell the bonds, we can move faster.
All right, can we, there's an item here in 3.3, the process for board approval of bond sale. Are there specifics we're talking about in very short term, or are you talking from a high level?
Really from a high level of, if you look at so there's really kind of two scenarios here of, we need to go to the board to authorize a not to exceed amount of bonds to issue, right? That resolution will provide for an amortization schedule based on, that not to exceed amount, and delegation to appropriate officials to sign that bond purchase agreement. Again, it'll also designate if you decide to go a competitive versus negotiated sale, and if you're going to negotiated sale, you can select the underwriter right there, and that as part of that resolution. So it authorizes signing a bond purchase agreement with that particular investment banking firm. The question becomes, do we wait till after the election to do that, or do we try to get ahead of it, subject to the bond successfully passing? Do we authorize the bonds based on the successful packages of the bonds? That just kind of, since the timing is tight, so either we try to cycle that into a regular meeting before the election, or we try to have a special meeting the day after the election.
I think that's what's in the tentative plan right now, right?
That's in one of the calendars. I think there's also a possibility of,
Yeah, and it comes down to kind of what you all at the time are comfortable with. We can figure it out.
so I have no preference, right? Because it's an authorization, so it really is the board's preference, and the question becomes the timing of it, right? So we're not sending out any documents to the market until there's board authorization for it. We're not pricing any issue until the election has been canvassed, right? So those are kind of our key dates as to, hey, we need board authorization before we can market, send out an offering document. So again, if you remember, when the investment bank, when the team's actually pre-marketing is based off of a preliminary official statement. So that's a document that has all the information an investor needs to an informed investment decision. So it's going to talk about the not to exceed dollar amount, the proposed amortization schedule, redemption rights, all that type of stuff. We'll have to get that all ready to go before the election in order to be able to send that out 2 days after the election, in order to be able to price the following week, and then have proceeds 2 weeks later. So that's kind of our condensed schedule of getting it moving, and the only question becomes, how comfortable is the board doing that action before the election, or holding a special meeting, doing it the day after, so that that offering document can go out the next day.
Yeah, so that, I mean, that, we're not gonna decide that here, that's a full board thing, that'll be the superintendent, the president, and all that stuff, so. It's useful to know that the timing pressure for sure, I think that for what we want to recommend to the full board, is there any other inputs that we need to start talking about options A, B, C, and what we want to do for a recommendation? We did not leave ourselves much time here, but it's not exactly a hard deadline either, so. Sean, I'd like to know what you're thinking from your perspective on the options from page 11.
I mean, I think it's great that we're talking about all this, and so, I mean, I would look at, I mean, we're flexible after the first issuance. I like the idea that we're not going to do all the heartburn with the millage, with the administration. You know that if this drops and goes back up, we're going to be accused of raising taxes next year.
Yep.
And that's not good PR for the school district. So, 1A, 1B, 1C, I think are more favorable. And I don't want to be too cavalier with the taxpayer dollars. I know that a lot of things can change. And so the lowest estimated interest cost for me is the most favorable, but I would also be favorable towards 1A or 1B. 1A, if that's what we can meet with the 5% 701 restrictions, 5% rule, because that's the lowest for spend within 6 months off of 15 million, right?
I don't think we have an issue getting to 5% on either amount.
Right, I think that's what I would look for. Either one, what you guys say, you could spend that, but I mean, we could always do another issuance right after that. But if we could spend that 15 million, I think that one looks favorable too. So I like 1A and 1B.
So can I just make a clarification on the 5%? It's just entering into a contract, it's not actually
Sure,
spending it, so
right.
just.
Yep, within
again,
6 months,
And I
right.
think that within 6 months,
Which we'll be able to do.
which again, I think
Even at 45.
comfortably, you should be able to do that
Go buy a
based
lot
on
of
some of your
furniture.
contracts. If you actually spend it, that's even better, but obviously.
The architect fees will probably be in the 6 to 7% range alone, so yeah, we'll be able to encumber it and probably spend that much.
Right.
Tim, I'm interested to hear your thoughts on
Well, I agree with the trying to hold that 3.14 and not introducing turmoil into millage rates as much as possible. I think there's significant value to that and that alone. So that naturally puts me into the 1A, 1B, 1C scenario. Now that this document, I assume it's a public document out in ether, that Sean, you say don't think so much about the estimated interest cost, but it obviously, it sticks out as being a materially less number than the other options. And going forward with 25 million as the first series, it sounds like we very much have projects to get going on. So I have no issue dealing with any of the regulatory restrictions. So that's where I sort of point my eyes towards 1B.
Okay, I said I favored 1A mostly, again, because it was the maximum in the available project funds. The difference being about 600,000. That main difference, I think, coming from estimated investment earnings over time as well, right? So that's going to fluctuate. We have flexibility on the timing and the future issuances, so I think we can figure that out. It's probably negligible, and I think getting to the Plant Moran folks' point about locking in rates on a larger amount, rather 15 going up to 25, I think is better to have it in your pocket to be planning a bigger chunk at this moment. And I do think that it shows some restraint if we do back it down from 45 to 25 on the first issuance, because I agree, the number is stark on the estimated interest cost. So, I end up, I'm okay with 1B, I think I would favor 1A, but in the interest of being unanimous, I'm perfectly comfortable with 1B. If we could make that recommendation for timing and amount to the full board unanimously, I think it would be a powerful statement.
Agreed. So that would be at the October 6th meeting?
Well, that's what I wanted to ask the three of you. We obviously are the underwriter at the October 6th. Do you want to do this as a, not going through the process and not doing the 2 reads? I don't know that, is there any benefit to, if we do it as second meeting in October? There's no timing issue with that, right?
No, I
Because we
mean, I
still
think
can tell and we
ultimately,
can still-
we just need to have an idea of what to put in the authorizing resolution as a not to exceed number, you know, and go from there. So when you consider the authorizing resolution, you'll just want to have that, you know, not to exceed figure in there. And then that'll also name the underwriter as well.
So I think we can write it as a first read at this board meeting and then approve it as a second, so for future action, if there's no, just to stay with that process, because I know we hate putting things just on for the community's sake.
So first read October 6th, second read
Whatever's that
14
October
days
two.
later, whatever it is. Okay. If that meets the timeline, it seems reasonable to me.
So we'll have a for action on the underwriter and then a for future action on this,
On authorization then, right?
correct?
And then is the
You're gonna
authorization
help
going to
me
be
with
the
that.
20th of October or right after the, I don't need to know that right now, but just, that's what we'll need to know. That's what
we
we
can't decide that in this.
totally understand that. So we'll play that out. It's either going to be later in October or.
It'll be the day before, the day after.
Okay,
Certainly.
okay.
I would, that would be my best guess, but that's just a best.
No, that's perfectly fine, because again, what Sean will end up doing is he actually gives me the information to put into the bond resolution based upon kind of the recommendations then. And then we'll prepare that and get that out for review, obviously.
Tom, do you see any issue in doing a 2 read or would you prefer a 1 read? Is there any pros for you?
A 2 read in the sense of your.
It won't be finalized until the second board meeting in October, or we could
Are you
potentially.
finalizing the underwriter selection or are you finalizing the?
No, the underwriter's coming at October 6th, regardless, so you're okay.
Yep.
Okay, so we'll do, okay.
I think let's go around and make sure everybody has all their questions, comments heard and answered. Ms. Agrusa, we'll start with you. Clint. Welcome to the team.
Thank you.
That was
Thank you.
quite a fire hydrant moment too.
I'm good. I mean, my big takeaway is I'm just gonna give our municipalities, all 6 of them, a heads up that our tax rates are dependent on the November election.
I think that would be prudent. AFM?
No, I thank you all for the time. I'll clean up some of these edits and send this around for your all record, you know, so you have the proper one going forward. I think, you know, we're here. Any more questions from anybody else, please don't hesitate to reach out. Yeah.
I just want to say thank you to everybody at the table, everybody in the room. It's a community effort. I think listening to everybody and adapting to different perspectives is important, and it was a very great example of that, professionals and different expertise. So I appreciate that from everybody. Thank you.
Thank you, everybody. Nothing.
I guess I just have one question. PFM, you guys are compensated on the proceeds or a flat advisory
I'd say on the par plus premium.
par plus premium? And the underwriter is based on the par plus premium,
They only get paid on par.
just on par, okay.
So, yep, that's it. So we have a base fee and then it's incrementally based on how much is issued, so.
For each one, okay, each tranche.
Yeah.
Okay.
Mr. Colis? Right, Ryan?
I'm good.
Okay. Mr. Madison?
I'm good, I'm happy with the choice 1B as well.
Dr. Tuttle? Okay, appreciate everybody. I would say we are adjourned. Thank you.
Thank you.